And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Friday, March 12th, 2021, just before a major moisture event in the state of Colorado. And I am very excited that on Plain Talk today we have Zach Friend. And Zach, I'm sorry. I know you were on Fox News yesterday with Harris Faulkner. You probably had a lot more viewers than what you're going to get today, but we're really pleased that you decided to join us today. Zach is a county supervisor for Santa Cruz County in California. Before that, he worked for the Santa Cruz Police Department in their comms department. Full disclosure, he is married to my niece and the father of my absolutely most awesome nephew, Elliot, whose artwork you can see in the background. And today he's going to be talking about a book he wrote called On Message. And I thought this was particularly relevant to today because it's talking about how we can build a compelling narrative that will make our organization succeed. So whether it's a political organization or a nonprofit organization, or if the organization is just your private business, telling your story is what is going to make it succeed in the future. So with that, Zach has a PowerPoint that I'll try to cover here in a minute. And Zach, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and welcome.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you all for taking the time this morning to join in. And I'm excited to speak to you all. I've obviously been out to at least Fort Morgan a decent number of times. And I think it's absolutely wonderful that you have an advocacy organization like this. I've had the good fortune of working on the federal side. I saw that, I think Cheryl was with USDA, and I've been in the federal side before I ended up in the city and county side. And I really think rural advocacy is something that needs to be focused on even more in this world. So I'm glad that you all participate in this organization. And I'll say too that if we can go over the concepts of the book and we can outline a narrative, a message, and kind of how to construct it. But if there's specific things you would like to talk about, I'm happy to do that with you right now on this Zoom meeting as well. So just feel free to use the chat, make it as informal as you'd like it to be. If I'm not hearing from anybody, I'm just going to continue through this presentation, but I think it works the best if we can make it local and relevant, because I'll be using more national things that you might be familiar with. All right, so we're going to get started. We can go ahead and go on to that first slide of the narrative there, Kathy. Thank you. So a large part of what I find that be it businesses or nonprofits or even political campaigns fail at is they focus so much on messaging and whatever messaging may mean to them, that they forget about building the foundation, and the foundation is really a narrative. And you'll see that I have on the side there emotion. If you take away one thing from this, just remember that having an emotionally compelling narrative, having an emotionally compelling message is by far the most important thing that you can do for yourself, for your business, for your organization. The community college system right now, as I saw, we have somebody from the community college system, absolutely focus on how emotion can connect in order to resonate. So the question though is how do you create a narrative? And I can walk through some examples of this. I mean, anytime you've ever seen a movie, every movie has the exact same structure. It has a challenge, some sort of struggle, and then it has a resolution. I mean, it doesn't matter whether I'm watching Disney movies with my 6-year-old or whether it's some sort of other movie, they all have this same structure. And you'll see that it even goes specifically in that order, where they present some sort of challenge, a struggle, and a resolution. The key to the struggle component, or the middle component, is this audience that's the center of the story. So in essence, can the person that you are trying to reach view themselves as a part of your story? And this is a very key component. So let me just give you, this sounds really theoretical, so let me give you just a basic example. There are ads that still continue to run for Yoplait yogurt that I've seen, and it's something that I mention in my book. And what they do is they basically have some sort of bathing suit. It's winter time in the background, so you can tell it's winter time. They have a bathing suit hanging up on the door, and so you know that the challenge has to do with some sort of connection to health and fitness in order to get into that bathing suit. The connection for Yoplait, though, is that they take you between that challenge and that resolution as being some sort of health food product. Ultimately, at the end of their 30-second ad, you do see this person on a beach, in a sunny beach in summertime, which I'm sure sounds wonderful with the storms that you're about to get hit there in the coming days. But you can see that the challenge is very real and easy on some sort of fitness side. The audience is at the center of the story because you can see yourself being somebody that might be in a situation that wants to eat better, for example, and the resolution is being able to enjoy that summer vacation. And the construct that takes you the whole way they portray it is their yogurt. So I think that you can contrast that with some other fitness component or some sort of fitness model. A lot of gyms, especially at the beginning of the year when people sign up, they just offer discounted rates and say it's time. It's a new year, new you. Let's kind of get focused on fitness. But people tend to burn out on that pretty quickly because they don't see themselves individually as part of that story or directly see how they are connected between the beginning and the end. So working through that, we can think about how to create a narrative. So if you are, for example, maybe if you're at the Morgan Community College, just to take it for example, one of the challenges obviously is maybe people are trying to learn a technical skill. Maybe they're trying to get into a four-year college. Maybe they're trying to advance their career. Maybe lost their job during the pandemic and they're looking for job retraining. Maybe they can't afford to do a four-year program. And so these are all things that might be within somebody's challenge. Obviously, the audience is very easy to put at the center of a story in this situation. It's an amazing local community college system. I've actually visited the campus over there when I've been to Fort Morgan. And I think it's very easy to see as a hometown component a lot of pride in that institution and to be able to put yourself at the end of it. The resolution, though, is showing the arc, the story arc between how that community college can take you from whatever your challenge is, job retraining, maybe a pandemic situation, maybe a bridge to four-year, and whatever career or future life goal you may have. It's the line between the challenge and the resolution. That is what you would be doing. So when you're telling a story about that community college, it would be emotional. It would be usually on a first person eyes of an individual, for example. You'd be telling the story of an individual student. Maybe they're the first in their generation to go to college. Maybe they lost their job, but you're presenting it in a way that the end user then can be emotionally connected to that. I don't want to go too much longer on narrative because we're going to spend most of our time now building messages based on the narrative. It is the foundation, but I wanted to be sure to give you an opportunity because I blew through this in only about 5 minutes. If you have any questions, go ahead and toss them up in the chat right now. And if not, we can move on toward once you have a message, once you have a narrative, how to construct a message. All right. I'm not seeing any specific questions, so I'm going to move over to the message construction. So this is what most people think about when they think about their business or their political campaign or their nonprofit is what is our message going to be? And I'll tell you one thing that it isn't is just some sort of catchy slogan. It has to be based back on whatever your underlying narrative is, otherwise it doesn't really resonate with anybody. So if you think about businesses or even political campaigns that have messages that have resonated, it has to go part and parcel with who that individual is. So Ronald Reagan or John McCain had very individual narratives about themselves. Obviously, Ronald Reagan I'm here in California, he had a big sunny California optimism that he portrayed as his narrative. So when he did It's Morning Again in America, and he did ads that worked on that component, it played beautifully into something that was already established about him, similar to John McCain as a maverick, for example, obviously a war hero. But this applies exactly in the same way to businesses or nonprofits. I mean, you couldn't just make a statement and a message and force it through. you actually have to have an underlying narrative that it makes sense to be connected with. So you can, Kathy, you're welcome to send out these individual slides if they're helpful to people, because I think that you will be able to do a lot by just using these message box constructs. So how do you develop a message? It should have three key elements. You'll see on the left, again, it should have emotion. It should contrast you with whoever you are trying to contrast with. And that it doesn't have to be a negative. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily an opponent, but maybe the contrast is just with a competitor. Maybe the contrast is with the internet, if you're a small local business, for example. And then you need to inoculate yourself and your message against ways that you'll be um, attacked by the other business, the other nonprofit, the community even that may be against something. Say you wanted to pass a local tax measure to support the libraries. When you're developing your message, for example, you have to think about ways that people are going to question whether they need to have that tax measure for roads or libraries or supporting small businesses, and have that built in to your message to inoculate. So how do you do that? Here's a 2x2 matrix, which, if you can believe it, is actually scientifically shown 2x2 matrices in order to develop constructive messages. And the first thing you would do is you would use the upper left quadrant to develop something that you would say about yourself. And you would just do something, a sentence or two that describes who you are. And you would develop 3 points that you think are unique to you. I list them as contrast points here, and that's why I say that they'd be unique to you and your business, your nonprofit. The next quadrant in the upper right is what you would say about whomever your opponent may be. And again, the opponent might not be a person, it might just be abstract. Say you're a locally owned bookstore and your opponent is Amazon or some sort of massive, or maybe it's Walmart, for example, and you're trying to encourage people, you would just think about what you would say about them in order to create those contrasts. But equally important, you want to put yourself in their shoes in the lower left quadrant to say what they would say about themselves. I mean, obviously, Amazon or Walmart has a very compelling message on price and access and delivery to your home during a pandemic that may be more difficult for a local business to compete with. What's important about what they would say about themselves, and what they would say about you in a second, but what they'd say about themselves is how you would contrast what they are going to say their strengths are with what you are going to say your strengths are in order to make your message more compelling. And in the bottom right, what they're going to say about you. They may not say anything about you if it's a situation of a Walmart versus a small locally owned business, but ultimately you still want to inoculate yourself as we move into vaccine land right now in pandemics. Think about inoculation. How do you protect yourself in advance against things that somebody or some entity may say about you in order to, and you can do that all through your message. So I'm actually going to walk you through an exercise that does exactly this in the next slide, and we can toggle back and forth with possibly Kathy so that it makes sense to people. But I'm going to walk through Southwest Airlines. I don't know if you guys remember the days when we used to be able to fly. It seems like those days are gone, but Southwest Airlines is fundamentally different from most other airlines, and they've been so successful as a business and in messaging that I would argue other airlines are now moving more toward them than they are moving toward other airlines. So you may remember in the upper left-hand side, it's Southwest on Southwest, or in other words, what you would say about yourself. By the way, just as a little cheat sheet in the lower left in the blue there, the grab your bag it's on, that's actually their slogan, their messaging, and we will deconstruct that in a second. So what Southwest says about themselves is that they take a new, and I imagine you've seen this in all their advertising or if you've flown on their airline, but they take a new approach to air travel, low fares, fun, ease of travel without the restrictions. So what are their contrast points? Well, they don't have baggage fees, they don't have change fees. And they used to just serve peanuts, and now I guess they've gotten rid of peanuts for peanut allergy purposes, but now they just serve pretzels. All the same, they don't serve meals, or they contrast with those sort of purchase options that you can get, generally speaking, on the legacy carriers. But think about that for those three things that I selected that they did. had to be thought about. These are the three strongest contrast points that they have versus, say, a legacy airline. They don't have baggage fees. Well, that must mean that the other ones do. They don't have change fees. Well, that must mean that the other team does. As far as the just serving peanuts, the point of that is to reinforce this message of it being low fare, fun, ease of travel. So this is Southwest then talking about a legacy carrier like a Delta or United or American Airlines. And so what would they say about them? And again, you would do this as well if you were a small locally owned bookshop or business, or a locally owned coffee shop trying to compete with some of the larger ones like a Starbucks, for example. What would you say? In this case, this Southwest is saying, well, the legacy airlines treat customers like a number. You know, they provide less service for higher costs. They have every time you call customer service, you can't reach a person. They don't change. They restrict choice. They have these massive baggage fees. You have to pay literally to choose what seat you want. They have change fees, and we're living in a world right now where we need a lot of flexibility. They have all these blackout dates and restrictions. You can't even use the miles for various things. Now, some of this stuff has changed during the pandemic. And as I had said earlier, they've moved closer toward where Southwest is on these issues than where they were on themselves. But if you're a legacy carrier and you're trying to defend yourself against this situation, what would you say about yourself? You would talk about that we reward our customers for loyalty. We have things like a first class cabin, for example. We have options to be able to fly internationally, for example. We have all these partners that we can, you might not just fly on United, you might fly on some international carrier, for example. We fly to more locations, we have larger options, multi-class cabins, larger reward programs. We're connected to shopping rewards and various deals like that. So what would they say about Southwest? Well, they would basically say Southwest is a budget airline. They offer you nothing but peanuts in return. You have limited options, no first class. It's not really designed for a business traveler. You can't get food on board. They fundamentally have domestic only flights. They do offer some flights that are further now than they have historically. And if you are a business traveler, after a long day of working, maybe flying on what they would call a cattle class kind of situation isn't what you would want. I think you can start to see here, though, I mean, for me personally, this makes Southwest seem much more attractive than a legacy carrier in this regard. I mean, the things that Southwest has are much more appealing to me than what a legacy carrier has. But if nothing else, the contrast is very, very clear between the two types of entities. This kind of young upstart, even though Southwest has been in existence since the 60s, but how they've definitely recreated themselves that way. And they just appear to be a flexible, fun airline. Anytime you've been on them and you see the safety presentations from the flight attendants, you can tell they are fundamentally different from some of these other airlines. And it is very telling to see that over the last year, most major carriers have moved closer toward a Southwest model where they don't have change fees, for example, and they've stripped down a lot of components than not. So this is how you would develop on those comparisons a message box. What you would say about yourself, what you say about your opponent or the other business or the other, whatever it is you're trying to compare yourself with, what they would say about themselves, and it's important to get in their mind anyway for your own messaging purposes, and what they would say about you so you can inoculate against that. So are there any questions on this? We're going to keep working specifically on this box, but are there any questions so far at this point? Please feel free to put it in the chat so we can get to it. Or if you have a specific question about your own business, I'd be happy to use it as an example in this exact same way. Easiest group ever. Kathy, you can invite me back whenever. I can say whatever, and I'm not even going to get a tough question. I love it. All right. So we are again we're gonna go to the next slide if possible, and you would say, well, how do I know whether the contrast points that I chose, how would I know whether the message that I ultimately land on works? So it has to answer these questions. And again, you're absolutely welcome to these slides and these questions. And actually after this too, if you have any additional questions, if you just contact Kathy, she absolutely knows how to get a hold of me, and I'd be happy to address a question that's unique to you in your business. I want you to succeed out in that wonderful part of our world. So the yeses that you would have to have, what would make a winning message, are right in front of you. Again, reemphasizing the emotion, the contrast, and the inoculation. And let's deconstruct for a second the Southwest message of grab a bag, it's on. So as you know, Southwest is obviously capitalizing on data that they have that show that the things that people hate about travel right now are everything from 4 or 5 ounces of liquids that you can bring on, to the new security regulations, to the baggage fees, to the non-flexibility, etc. So what they're trying to do is make their message appear to be the opposite of that. Sort of going back to a gilded age of when travel was fun, the days when you used to be able to go all the way through to the gate to meet somebody to pick them up, the good old days. So the question is whether or not their message does this. Does it zero in on both their strengths and their opponent's weaknesses? So going through these questions, does the message apply uniquely to my business or my candidate? Well, in this case, absolutely. I mean, Southwest is the only airline that has historically been offering no baggage fees, no change fees, no blackout dates. So in that case, grab a bag, it's on. I mean, it is specifically or unique to them. Is the message big enough and not generic? Well, in this case, I would argue actually that this part of their message maybe doesn't fully hit this. They tested a message that you may recollect some time back called the low fare airline, with all capitals on the or the. And in that case, that obviously is a bigger message, but it was pretty generic. In that case, they weren't the only low fare airline, and so I thought that it didn't really work. In this case, though, maybe on that one point, it doesn't quite hit. The next one, though, are they a credible messenger of this message? Well, absolutely. They're the only airline well before these other airlines even considered doing this point. This is the uniqueness to them component. They are absolutely a credible messenger. In fact, I'd argue they're the only one that could get away with that. So does it in some way give you a shot and inoculate you on points where you're going to be subject to attack? Well, I assume that airlines are going to be, legacy carriers are going to attack them on having limited options, flying to secondary airports, lack of a true loyalty program, etc. And the way that they deal with that on grab a bag, it's on, is they actually make fun of the situation. They make travel light again. While it doesn't specifically inoculate against that attack, it brushes it off in a way that says, what we focus on is returning air travel to a fun time. Maybe it doesn't fit for everybody, but for most customers, this is what the kind of image that we're trying to create. So in that way, that's another good way to inoculate against that situation. And the last one is does it offer an emotional connection? And it absolutely does. As we had started this conversation about Southwest saying, there was a time of travel that people really, I mean, travel is very emotional. You're going to see somebody, you're leaving somebody, which is also very emotional, or maybe it's a family vacation. Sometimes it's for work, but in a lot of contexts, there's a very deep emotional rationale as to why you're traveling somewhere. For when I fly into Denver, it's specifically to see Kathy. So I'm seeing family. When I go to other places in the country, it's generally that reason. There's an emotional rationale as to why we're doing this. And so how do they connect to that? Well, grab your bag, it's on. First off, they call it a bag, which in and of itself plays well into their low fare fun component. It's on, travel again is on, meaning that it's fun again, it's an easy thing to do again. This kind of world is a world that we get to go back to. I think we do have a question in here. Paula asks, how to inoculate if the attack about you or your company is a lie? That's a great question. Well, Paula, I exist a lot in the world of politics. So where most things aren't actually true, it seems. And it's without referring you to an entire section of my book, but I do actually have a section that talks specifically about this. And the easiest way to refute a lie is to have a personal connection with the people that you're trying to message to. So, for example, if you are we'll just say you're famous, and since you're retired big time, it says right here, I'm going to assume that that's the case. People maybe sometimes develop specific viewpoints of a movie star, for example, and it can be carried by the tabloid press. But there are movie stars that have developed specific narratives about them that make it very hard for that to stick. So let's assume that you or your company has developed a very trusted local narrative. Maybe you are some sort of small local business that is the local hardware store that people know that that's the place that I go to for advice, even free advice on things. Maybe it's a little bit more expensive, but it's the place that I've developed those personal relationships. In this situation, the easiest way to refute a lie is to actually have surrogates or the world around you. You have personal relationships with people so that it doesn't stick. So as going back to the narrative component of it, if you've developed this ethos, this narrative about you as a certain way, it's much harder for lies about you or your company to stick. And this is something I'd be happy afterwards if you have a specific, or if you have it right now, you want to put it in the chat of a very specific example, we can work through it. Otherwise, after this is done, if there's something in particular, I'd be happy to talk to you more in depth about it. Again, I'm kind of glossing over something that's an entire section that I wrote in the book about, but it goes back to having that narrative. It's very hard, for example, to attack Southwest on the things that people already accept about them, that they are very flexible on certain things, that they're more fun on certain things, that they, so if you were to go after them and say it's a boring airline, you were to go after them and lie about certain elements, there would be pushback because they've established this very specific narrative about who they are. And if you've built that foundation in a very specific way, most of the lies will actually not stick. Now, I recognize that we live in a world of social media where people self-select into the realities that they want to self-select into. Again, and a whole other section of the book that focuses on that element, but the reality is that it is getting a little bit harder within certain subsets when people aren't willing to sort of move outside of their bubble to contrast this component, but overall narratives still do stick. Even in a complete world of disinformation, and there's a lot of it right now, people still have underlying narratives. If you just think about maybe the recent presidential campaign, people had very specific narratives about the two candidates that no matter how much disinformation was put out there, at the end of the day, people still had an underlying understanding of who the two individuals were because they had very strong narratives. Both sides actually, I would say, did a very good job of developing specific narratives about who their candidates were. And so nonstop attacks on specific media outlets or social media, for example, didn't really move the fundamental needle of where people were of what they believed. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but again, I'm happy to chat with you more about a specific instance if you'd like afterwards, or if you have something you want to post up, we can do it. Are there any other questions on the message component? You're welcome, Paula. This is a lot, and so I think it'll be useful to just have this presentation for you afterwards to do this exercise. But again, creating the box on this 2x2 matrix is the first step. What you say about yourself, what you say about the other person, what they say about themselves, and what they say about you. And what you will notice is what starts to come out of that is a very specific message that is your strongest message. So if we can go on to the next slide, please, Kath. And this is just another example of exactly this. I apologize that not all of it appeared to show up, but I'm sure you'll be able to know what these points are anyway. So this is, I'm actually using an Apple computer as I talk to you right now. And Apple and all non-Apple products or PCs, Apple has done a very good job of separating themselves from other computer companies, even, or other technology companies, even though I would actually submit that now a lot of these products, there's a lot of equivalency, but they still have such a strong brand. People still seek them out, from the iPhone to the MacBook, for example, when they're looking for very specific things on to be the forefront of technology, to not have viruses, to be the cool kid on the block, for example. So Apple has basically never changed their message, and their message is think different, which is not grammatically correct, but it's still a cool slogan all the same, think different. And so how would Apple do this? And I think some of this is, I mean, you may remember Microsoft dominated the market for a certain period of time, and Apple was able to build this absolutely strong, loyal following. So to Paula's earlier question, they had such a strong narrative with some of the influencers within the technology world that attacks on them were nearly impossible. And Microsoft actually tried to do exactly that. They had the money to really go after them, and it was unsuccessful. So what does Apple say about themselves? Well, they think different or differently. Their products are designed to enrich lives and make technology innovative. So they create fun and functional projects. They perform flawlessly. I mean, they don't have that long startup time, for example, that people complain about with some of the older Windows-based programs. They have great product experience. It's intuitive. And they really make a customer-centric business where it's a feedback loop where people, especially technology innovators, are really able to provide feedback. So what do they say about PCs? Well, Apple isn't trying, by the way, to be a standard product. They're not trying to be the product that's in every Fortune 500 company or government entity. So they say that the PCs focus so much on standardization that they end up with these basically generic products that people don't really want and don't function that well. They don't innovate because they care more about cost cutting. It makes their products much more prone to viruses and hackers. Now, that's actually true as far as the vulnerability component of PCs. They claim that PCs aren't intuitive. I mean, any of you have tried to navigate your way through some of the Outlook or Microsoft programs probably have lived that reality. They break a lot. You're constantly needing to update the programs. They focus on volume over quality, profit over innovation, et cetera. So if you were, of course, the PC world, you would say something very different about yourself, and you would talk about the fact that you do make products cheaper and more accessible. I mean, the other thing is that you would say Apple is kind of the elitist product. You're trying to develop something, you're making technology in a world of equity that actually is much more relevant to the greater world. You would say that they're much more accessible, that they're ubiquitous, which is good because then that people only have to be trained on one kind of product and then it actually works. And they would talk about Apple. They would say obviously the exact opposite of what Apple's saying about themselves. They make specialty products. They're super expensive. They don't work on many platforms. Everything's proprietary. So their products are very unfamiliar to people that maybe have been working in most companies that are used to an Outlook or Windows-based system. The contrasts here are really, really clear between these two types of products, and that's really strong and good. So if you're Apple, it's good to have this kind of contrast. It's really good to have that kind of situation. And as you can tell by their sales numbers, they're really not struggling on this contrast. PCs struggle, I think, more because now what's the difference between Samsung, Toshiba, or any other Microsoft Windows-based computer platform? You have Apple, and then you have everybody else. And if you are in your situation, you want to be the person versus everybody else, because that differentiation builds loyalty and success within whatever it may be. If you are the local community college and you're it, you want to be a standalone among the Eastern Colorado community colleges. If you are a coffee shop, if you're Pepe's or whatever, you want to stand alone. These are all part of what I think that you would do. So this is the same, what you would say about yourself, what you'd say about them, what they'd say about themselves, what they'd say about you. It's just another example with a product that you would know to see how this is done. And by the way, these are actually thought of situations. I mean, they spend a lot of money and hire a lot of consultants to try and find these contrast points. And for what it's worth, since I've worked on multiple national presidential campaigns doing national messaging, this is exactly what is done on those as well. So these are constructed situations for both Fortune 500 companies and presidential campaigns that work equally at a local level. So Kathy, if you could go to so it's great that you've developed a message, you did the 2x2 matrix, but you're probably asking me, and even if you're not, I'm going to do it anyway. How do I actually apply this? I mean, so I came up with these great contrast points. I saw that I work at Apple and I saw how we can differentiate our products, but that's great. Now, how do I actually apply a message once I've come up with something that inoculates myself, something that has emotion, and something that has contrasts? In the case of them, thinking different is something that I think most people actually want to see themselves that way. That's the emotion there. People don't want to just be followers. They want to see themselves as leaders in whatever field or world that they're in. The contrasts there are about as clear cut as possible, similar to Southwest. They are literally doing things that the other side isn't doing. It's them versus everybody else, or everybody else versus them. So, the inoculation component of it is that, well, if they're going to get attacked as being proprietary and unique, how do they own that? Well, they say, well, we think different. I mean, we don't want to be like you. So it really immediately inoculates them from that attack. They actually own that criticism of them as exactly their rationale for being in business. So why does this matter? Well, you've done a 2x2 matrix to come up with the strongest contrast points. Maybe you settled on something that you think is the core message of your business, meaning think different. And now you can actually create a message box. If any of you ever deal with board presentations, presentations to the community, presentations to the media, maybe you want to write an article in the Fort Morgan Times or whatever it may be. If you are doing those things, I guarantee you that using this message box will help create a model by which you can articulate your message very easily. And by the way, answer any question that is being asked of you. In a world now where we're not really being asked anything live on television or on the local news, and you can do everything via Zoom, for example, or you can even have this up right in front of you, and it actually would make your life a lot easier. Again, that's abstract. So, Kathy, if we go to the next slide, I'll explain it. So this is what came out of that 2x2 matrix for Apple. Core message, think different. Key components are that their products are customer friendly, that they innovate, that they have set sales records. That's more relevant when you're talking, obviously, to investors, and reliability. So the key takeaways that they want you to know: innovation, customer friendly, reliability. And then they have little points below that actually re-emphasize that. So why would this matter? So you're asked a question, and we'll do this here in a second, and you are able to, having this box up, answer whatever question comes your way. So you did the 2x2, you were able to figure out the strongest contrast points, you were able to figure out where the strongest inoculation was, you had some emotion component to it, and you realized the strongest thing that we have is that we think different, we innovate where they don't, our products are customer friendly where theirs aren't, we're reliable and theirs are just virus and hacked all the time. On the last component, they set these sales records because that's the thing. Those are the things that people are looking for. They're not looking for generic. They're not looking for mass produced. You can see how this starts to really set them apart now. You do this 2x2, you boil it down to this, and now we apply it. So Kathy, we go on to the next to last slide here. This would just be something that they would say is a position statement. At Apple, we reject the belief that to succeed, you must stagnate. That's why our customers' employees are encouraged to think different, to expect more from their technology. Focusing on innovation and putting functionality and reliability first, we have set unparalleled sales and growth records. Now you can see that I basically turned into narrative form that message box. That's sort of a general policy statement. It hits all of the key points, also inoculates them. But how would you use it in a more specific way? So we'll go on to this is actually the final slide here. Say you got a question from an investor, for example, in this situation. How do we believe that these sales numbers are continue to be sustainable? These are updated sales numbers, by the way. I double checked this before I made this last slide. So you have that message box. Think different is the core message. So you have to link back to that. You have those sub-points below it, and we'll go back and I'll show you again what this means. But you can see how using that box, any question that's asked of you, you're able to, in essence, be on message. We don't fit standard company molds. We think different. You mention your products. You talk about the number of people that they have. We continue to grow because we focus on reliability, function, and design. You mentioned a third-party validator. Even PC World Magazine rated our products as more reliable. These are the same things you would do at a local business. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it kind of situation. Even the X, Y, and Z publication rated us as #1. So I'm going to go back to, if you can go back to number 8, the blue and yellow. So again, you're asked this question, how do we know that these sales numbers are going to continue? And this is, you have this box sitting right in front of you, and you would say, well, here at Apple, we encourage our employees to think different. That's why we've developed so much energy on innovation. Our products are customer friendly, and we develop innovative, intuitive products that are easy to use. That's why we continue to set sales records. In fact, we've sold now, it's actually over 900 million iPhones and iPads of over 250 million. In fact, and you go over to the left side, even PC World rates us more reliable than PCs. So you can see how this sitting in front of you allows you to functionally answer any question that would be presented to you. You know that this is going to present your business or nonprofit in the most favorable light because you've done this contrast point between you and your quote unquote opponents, and it develops into this. I wanted to leave the last, and it looks like we've actually got that here, the last 15 minutes for an opportunity to go over a specific example if you had one, or if you have specific questions. You can imagine these when I normally go over this is much longer than just an hour, but I'm trying to condense it down into something that's usable for you. So Kathy, by the way, thanks for letting me come on, but I want to definitely ensure that I get an opportunity to answer people's questions if they have them on how to apply these boxes.
One of the things I thought of, Zach, and the rest of you, if you want to turn on your cameras so Zach can see who he's looking at, and we'll just kind of have an open forum here for questions. How does this differ from the traditional SWOT analysis?
Well, I mean, I think that there are elements about having strengths and weaknesses, but I actually think that this is just an easier way to do it. I think a 2x2 matrix, asking yourself very specific situations. By the way, also in a SWOT analysis, you don't focus necessarily on emotion, and I think that emotion is something that resonates the most with people. A lot of it is also on data. Let me just say, going back to the Yoplait example, I mean, Yoplait could have an ad that said that 40% of people that eat Yoplait lose 2 pounds within 4 weeks, and it doesn't mean anything, right? If you did a SWOT analysis, that may actually be what their strengths are, is that there's greater weight loss associated with it. But the other way to do it is to give an emotional connection on, you know, the summer vacation example that I gave, and using that kind of imagery and emotion. I found that this is about the amount of attention span that I have, the 2x2 matrix of asking these questions about myself, distilling that down, and then just having this box ready on almost every issue. It's really, really good on a crisis communication standpoint. For example, if you had a financial crisis associated with your business, if you had a crisis at City Hall, these are things that you can very quickly develop this matrix and have it ready for you to answer those questions when it comes forward. This is not, by the way, about spinning. This is not about, I mean, everything I said in these situations are true. These are honest components about these businesses or nonprofits, but it's presenting them in a way that your end user is going to be able to own because they already feel that way about the narrative about your business or company.
Okay, other questions? You did good. Oh,
I took myself off mute.
Okay. I was like, Kurt, I thought you were going to ask a question. Go ahead.
I wasn't going to ask a question. I was going to say, you know, I'm very familiar with the SWOT analysis kind of stuff, and I think that this tool is really useful to think of the various angles. I was really intrigued in thinking about the Southwest kind of examples, and then of course the Apple example. So I really appreciate the ideas. It's very valuable.
I appreciate you participating, Kurt. It's good to meet you virtually. Paula, thanks for the question. You know, this is a great question. Kathy was the first person I called to make sure there was nothing in her yard when I saw that situation of that United plane. And Boeing, And I do think that Boeing does have a narrative issue. I mean, they've got a real problem of right now of people don't feel safe associated, especially with the 737 Maxes and with, in some respects, these specific engines on the 777s that were unique to this situation. Let me first say, I don't think United has a problem as much as Boeing has a problem, because there's multiple airlines that use this product. But what I think that Boeing did wrong was that they weren't honest. I mean, so what they didn't do initially, they knew that they had a problem. They didn't come out immediately and address the issue. And so now there's no easy way to clean it up, to rebuild that trust. I think that in all situations where you've screwed up, which they clearly did, the first thing they needed to do is own it, and then in some respects overcorrect to rebuild that trust. I mean, my personal opinion is I think they're still doing a poor job of that. I don't think that they've been remarkably, they should be a lot more transparent. I mean, speaking for myself, I'm not looking forward to getting on a 737 Max at this point. I still don't feel like I truly understood what happened. I understand the technology and the patch, but I mean, has it really been fixed, et cetera? So I think that what they need to do is they need to open up the books and open up the doors. They should probably be having the media literally like the equivalent of a 60-minute special inside the Seattle plant, where they're meeting with the scientists, they're meeting with the engineers, they're showing them exactly what they're doing. They're really literally drilling down and showing use. They feel like no one feels like they're hiding anything anymore. Once you get back to the sense of trust, you can go back to remessaging the fact that the reality is literally hundreds of thousands of people fly every single day without a single incident. And we're talking about a high profile situation. I mean, I'd much rather be on that United flight to Honolulu than driving on the 10, right? Because it's actually much more dangerous to be driving on the freeways than it is that United flight. But because they had set themselves up with the 737 Max issue, I think that's the problem that they have. So that's what I would recommend to them. They definitely aren't paying me or hiring me. So, but I would tell them that they've got to open up the doors. I mean, they literally have to start showing people what it is they've been doing the whole time. Have trusted figures on there, people that either be it independent figures, et cetera, that are helping push that story for them. That's a really good question. I think that Boeing's going to have some issue for a while, though.
And for clarification, he didn't call to see if I was okay if something landed on me. He called to see if I found something so we could be rich.
That is what I said. I wanted to see if we were building up her eBay business, which I think it's a valid thing, right?
All right. Any other questions before we close out for today?
And again, and Kathy, I just want to say again that the offer is valid. If something comes up that you hadn't thought of, just drop Kathy a line. And if it's a question I can answer, I'll be happy to provide that answer to you about something maybe unique to your business or organization.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Zach. It was nice to see you face to face. And that artwork behind Zach is my favorite great nephew, Elliot's artwork. He's quite the artist. But everybody have a safe weekend coming up. Get your deep snow boots on. Get your snacks in, get the wine in, get the beer in, do whatever you need to do. And hopefully we're going to have a skiff and no wind, and it'll rain all weekend, which would be the absolute perfect thing. So thank you very much, Zach. Thank you to the rest of you for joining us. And with that, we'll see you all later.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.